Mayor Watson, thank you for taking some time out to talk with us.
My pleasure.
You know, your first 100 days was Saturday. One word to describe those first 100 days.
Hurried. The other one would probably be happy. A happy 100 days and a hurried 100 days.
Yeah, why hurried?
Well, I ran saying that we needed to make some changes at City Hall and there needed to be a sense of urgency about it. And we have moved with a sense of urgency on trying to make local government work better, including in a fairly rapid fashion, changing city managers, which has resulted in a significant reorganization of the City Hall and folks at City Hall. Today we have someone different at the head of Austin Energy and someone different at the head of the airport. And other positions as well. The assistant city manager for public safety is a former acting chief of police. And so a significant number of changes have been made. And there are other things like the need to speed up our site planning process so that we can get permits for building, especially with regard to affordable housing. I brought in McKinsey Consulting to do sort of a sunset or a performance review, and they're on that, and so we ought to have some recommendations back from them. But I could go on and on about hurried but happy, but from the sense that we needed to shake things up, and we've done it with some urgency.
While you wanted to address things with a sense of urgency, were you anticipating the pace at which these things were going to come at you? You've had a lot of things to deal with in your first one.
Well, you know, I must admit that I didn't expect some of I joke that shortly after I got into office, we had darkness, freezing, and disease. And what I mean by that, of course, is we had a winter storm that was worse than people expected. Which created issues of light, power being out, and then of course right on the tail end of that, I got COVID. So when I joke about that, that changed, I think, to some degree, the pace. But yeah, there were some unexpected things that popped up in that. But I think we're handling that the way we would want to handle that, and in fact, some of that period of time highlighted some of the things that we needed to change. For example, we now have a different person that's head of emergency operations. The city manager and I have worked on how we're going to deal with communication in the future to make sure we do a better job. So some of the things that generally I was saying needed to happen, that winter storm and how it was handled highlighted the urgent need.
Let's talk about that. A month after you were in office, the storm hit. And do you think now, looking back, there was anything that Austin could have been doing differently to prevent some of, how disastrous that was?
You know, as I did at the time, I'll take full responsibility. As the mayor of this city, I take full responsibility for how things get handled. But a whole lot of that was kind of a unique way that the storm hit. And, there was the National Weather Service saying one thing, even as things, things changed from what they had said. But there are some things that needed to be handled differently. First of all was the acceptance of responsibility. And some of the folks that were involved in the day-to-day operations and how things got managed needed to accept responsibility. I'm the mayor and I accept responsibility for it, but we have people that were managing things. But most importantly was that we could make a change on was how it is that we communicate with our customers and the people that are being impacted, and how we make sure that they're aware and prepared, but also being candid and forthright and accurate when we tell them what to expect. So that, for example, we don't tell people we ought to have everybody's power restored on this Friday, but it ends up being the following weekend, things like that. Because people want to know that their government is acting in an accurate way. And that was one of the biggest failings during that period of time.
We talk about communications and communicating with Austin residents. Some people say, well, you're the mayor. Surely you can call a press conference whenever you please.
Well, in fact, what happened was that we had the real big day on Wednesday, and on Thursday we did have a press conference. But part of what was going on was you had an emergency operations center that had people that I was saying, let's have the press conference, let's go with it, and they wanted to wait on some other things to come in. So we had the press conference the next morning. I wish that we had had a press conference the day before, but you try to balance out and make sure you have the accurate information that you need. And that's why on the day before I said we're going to start having press conferences every day, and we're going to make sure that people do know what's going on.
Trust me, we understand the difficulties in predicting the weather.
Yes,
It's something we deal with quite often. One of the realities that came from that winter storm was the the firing of City Manager Spencer Cronk. Why was it necessary for him to leave?
Well, it wasn't just because of that. There were other reasons, and that ended up happening. Although that was a very obvious moment, and we were able to, like I said a minute ago, that was one of those things that highlighted some of the problems that we had at City Hall. And it included things like with regard to how he presented the police contract. But the other thing that is important about this, and one of the reasons that we've moved with the urgency of getting a new city manager with real experience as a city manager, and you see the reorganization going on, is, as I said before, and I believe it even more now, we inherited a city hall that wasn't organized for success. And that falls to the manager. Many folks don't know that in Austin, we have a council manager form of government, where the city manager is the one that is actually responsible for the overall workforce and for the management of things like Austin Energy. There's a general manager, but they report to the manager, the city manager. So you have things like that. And in our view, the place wasn't organized to succeed the way Austinites deserve.
I caught something you said there. You said a city manager with real city manager experience. This was Cronk's first time being a city manager.
Right.
And do you feel like some of the mistakes perhaps that he was making in your view and the view of the council is because this was his first time?
Well, I'll say two things about that may answer that question. One is we really needed somebody that we didn't want to bring in an interim that hadn't been a city manager because the changes needed to be made and we needed to get things stabilized. The second thing I'll say about that is that what we're looking for, I think, what I'm looking for, and I think the council will be looking for, is someone with real experience as a city manager to come in as the permanent city manager, because I believe that it makes a real difference in how you get things done. We've already seen it, I believe, in the way that the interim city manager, Jesus Garza, has gone about approaching things and how he even interacts with the council in the hallways and on the dais. It makes a difference.
You mentioned that wasn't the winter storm and the power failure wasn't the catalyst for Cronk, but it was leading up. But you had only been in office, a month or so. What else was leading up? What else were you seeing, or what else were you hearing from?
Well, let's just go back to what I've been saying. One is the requirement that, or the idea that the place was not organized the way I thought we were. We had a number of examples of where City Hall was not succeeding, and I was not seeing the sense of urgency to fix those sorts of things and step out with regard to making sure, for example, it's not a brand new problem that it takes forever to get a permit in the city of Austin. Right. That's been there for a number of years, and there was about 5 years that somebody was there that could manage to fix those sorts of things that hadn't happened, as one example.
No, I know. One of my first stories when I started here 11 years ago was the backlog on city permits. So I understand that. When it came to appointing an interim city manager, you moved pretty swiftly to name who was the city manager when you were formerly mayor. What was the decision behind that rather than one of the assistant city managers?
Well, We needed somebody that, as we've already discussed, there was a belief we needed somebody that had been a city manager. And we were very fortunate because right here in Austin, Texas, we had someone that had experience as being a city manager and being a successful city manager that had even received awards from Governing Magazine, and he indicated that he would be available for such a thing, and so we got very lucky, and he's doing a great job.
Is there any concern about the message that sent to the assistant city managers?
Well, the truth of the matter is, we wanted somebody, if you want somebody that has experience as a city manager, bring in somebody with experience as a city manager, and then create the appropriate process to pick a permanent city manager, that if there are assistant city managers that want that permanent position, they'll be in a position to compete for that.
I understand. I want to talk a little bit about policing.
Sure.
In Austin. That has obviously been of grave concerns, particularly when we saw what happened with the street takeovers. You leaned on your experience and your relationships to bring in DPS. Talk to us about that decision to have them help us.
Well, there's a couple of things that ought to create a context for that. One is that I inherited a situation with regard to policing that has a number of factors in it. One factor is that we're around 300 officers short beneath our authorized strength at the police department, and that is not and was not getting better because just on pure attrition and on how many people you can get in cadet classes and recruit. There's a national issue and difficulty in recruiting police. That's not just an Austin problem. The second important part of that was that I inherited a situation where it looked like we were going to get to a point where the police contract could expire. One of the things that I had told Mr. Cronk very early, was don't wait until the last minute on this. This should not be something that you wait until the last minute, but it ended up being the last minute. But we were faced with the possibility that there would be, we would be outside of the contract, meaning the contract would lapse without a new contract. The third thing in all of that was that we have 2 different petitions that were certified, and under our city charter, what happens is we have an initiative and referendum process where someone or some group can get enough signatures, and when it's certified by the clerk, then the city council only has 2 choices, 2 and only 2. One, they can immediately adopt that as an ordinance, or they can put it on the ballot. Let the voters decide. So that was also pending, and what we've had to do, and what I think we've done a good job of doing, is trying to stabilize that situation and make things better, and here's how. First of all, we have protected people's right to vote on matters that are important to them. Our charter sets up a way that people get to do that, and we said we're not going to take action that would step in front of that right to vote. The second thing is that even without a contract, we made sure, we guaranteed that police officers would still have their salaries, and we guaranteed they would still have their retirement benefits. And in addition, we had, and the city manager prepared a way to give everybody a 4% pay raise. We added a retirement step so that people that stayed longer on the police force, so that they wouldn't retire, they would get an additional pay raise. We also created a mechanism to incentivize people to come into the police force, the academy, and if they stay and they meet this time frame and the next time frame, they would ultimately be able to receive up to $15,000 more just for going through, starting the academy and going through the academy. And then the last part of it is we can see that response times were up not where you would want them to be. We knew that our traffic issues, traffic fatalities and other issues, they were up and not where you wanted them to be. And so we applied some common sense. And that common sense and practical approach was the Department of Public Safety has officers that are trained and certified, and they were in a position to supplement and support the Austin Police Department. And so we asked them to come in and help, and we're already seeing positive results.
You know, obviously DPS plays by its rules, APD plays by its rules, its own rules in terms of how they do business, how they go about those day-to-day operations. Any concern that what DPS is doing or will do could run counter to the policies of the city?
A couple of things about that. First of all, the Austin Chief of Police and the director, the regional director of DPS for this area, they talk every day, and they speak every day in part so that what they make sure happens is that DPS is supplementing and supporting APD and doing the things the way we would want them to do to meet Austin's values. The other thing is that it's not uncommon. In fact, it happens where DPS follows certain policies of the county in which they're located, so that it's not doing it just their way, it's doing it more the way of the local community. So you ask the question, are there concerns? Sure, but we're monitoring that. So far what they're doing is following what we've asked that they do, and we're going to monitor that, because when I say to people that I want Austinites to be safe and feel safe, that includes when they see a heightened presence of police. I don't want them to be fearful of that situation. That also includes if you see a light flashing in your rearview mirror and you're being stopped, or police are approaching your car and you're a person of color. I don't want there to be that fear. So we're going to monitor this closely. And then the other thing I'd say about it is what we've asked them to help us with, and what they're primarily helping us with, is traffic and violent crime, dealing with violent crime. And so that doesn't necessarily put them in a position that some of the concerns would come to fruition. And setting it up that way, I think, makes a difference.
Let's take a step back to the police contract, because the deal that you all were able to work out was temporary. Wasn't as long as a traditional police contract. Right. How's that going in terms of the negotiations on the bigger contract?
Well, there aren't negotiations right now. But it's important for your viewers to understand how that all played out. A minute ago when I said that we protected people's right to vote, that vote comes up in May. And a lot of people say, we wanted the police to have a 4-year contract, and the police say, the union says it wants to have a 4-year contract. The real problem with that is that if you do 4 years, what you've done is you've preempted that vote. Mm-hmm. You've preempted the people's right to vote. So how do you protect that right to vote and also protect and show that you support your police? Well, you do it the way we did it. We let that vote go forward. And by the way, we said, let's have a 1-year contract. Let's agree to a 1-year contract, because what that would do is it would allow us to have the vote and then immediately start negotiating based upon what we said, what the people said they wanted, and we would be in a position in a very short period of time to enter into a new contract that could be 4 years. So there has not been, since the contract terminated, and there's not been negotiation, but that's why I and the council wanted to make sure the rank and file police officers knew we cared about them, we supported them, and that's why they got pay raises and other retirement benefits. What my hope is that we'll get to May 6th, we'll have an election, and the very next day, I know the city manager and I and the council are ready to start talking about what goes into that contract. And once you know that, once we have that election, let's get after it so that we do provide longer term security, because that's what I think pretty much everybody wants to see.
Right. There will be two propositions
Yes.
on that ballot in May regarding police. You have the initial one calling for more police oversight and really dictating how that's done. And then you have the second petition that also calls for police oversight, but not as restrictive. In fact, they're literally very similar, just missing a few lines. Have you said, are you willing to say which or if at all those propositions you?
Right now, the way I want to approach that is as I said a minute ago, let the people make their decision on
You're
this.
the people too.
Yeah,
You
no
get to
question.
vote.
I do get to vote, but I want to make sure that we let people have the opportunity to vote on that. One of the problems with the petition process, of course, is you end up with something like this, where if both could pass, and if both pass, it creates a real issue. But for right now, I'm gonna defer to the voters. I ask them all, please spend time learning about those propositions and making your decision.
Yeah, we'll talk about it on May 7th is what you're telling me.
Well, maybe.
You know, I want to ask you about Project Connect.
Yeah.
This was a very big talking point during your campaign, during the election season. And we recently had ATP come out and show the 5 options. And the 5 options don't look like what people originally voted for, but the 5 options are within budget. Talk to us about your thoughts about where Project Connect stands right now today.
Well, the truth of the matter is it has to be within budget. Because, and some say or act like they think it's different than that, but the truth of the matter is it has to stay in budget, because what the voters said is that they're willing to raise their tax. They ratified raising their property taxes by a very specific amount to pay for a rail system. And yes, at the time they voted, since we've all become expert now in supply chain and inflation, at the time they voted, that tax amount, based upon projections of what you would receive, could build X. But like every infrastructure project out there, for that matter, like the work you have done on your house, the inflation and supply chain have added to the cost. So when you have a live within your means election, where you just have a certain amount, what you have to do, you only have 2 factors that you can deal with. One is the product, the other is time. So what you see is are 5 different proposals that live within the means, but get us on the path of what the voters said they wanted. They said they wanted to solve certain types of problems and reach certain goals. One of the goals was to get us some alternative transportation options, such as rail. And one of the problems they wanted us to address was the fact that we had a dearth of those sorts of options, and that it makes an impact on how we can even grow in this city. The city council, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, unanimously voted to begin the process of allowing for what are referred to as equitable transit-oriented developments. What those will do is they will allow for density in development in a responsible way that will also allow for more housing options. So we need to move forward on those kinds of things, but live within our means. And like I say, if you were just fixing a bathroom, it's gone up in price, and nobody's surprised by that, but we need to keep moving.
When you say funding alternatives to transportation, I understand what you're saying. I understand what the ballot language was, but I think if you went out and you talked to your, everyday Austinite, they thought they were voting for rail.
They are.
They very specifically rail.
Well, they are voting for rail. And in fact, the ballot language speaks to rail, and the contract with the voters, the additional contract with the voters, speaks of rail. Mm-hmm. And that's what they will get, and that's what the 5 options are. It will take longer to build some of that rail, but we will begin the process. Listen, I was mayor a couple of years ago when in 2000 when it was the first time we ever put rail on the ballot. And it lost by less than 2,000 votes. Think about what we would be doing today had that passed. We would be so far, I want to say down the road, but that would be so far down the rail. We would be so far down the rail on these alternatives, and think about how much money we would have saved because things have gone up in price. This is for rail. That's what the 5 options talk about. It's for rail. It's just that when you have 2 factors you can deal with, when you have inflation like what we've seen in the last couple of years, and you've had the supply chain problems that we've had as a result of the pandemic, that's unique, and it makes a difference in all infrastructure projects.
Sure, it's unique. The rail prop passed during the pandemic, and it's been 3 years now. So now we're back to having 5 options, and I know you're the mayor, you're not the head of ATP. But here we are with 5 options, and now we have to decide which is going to take more time, which means it's going to be more time, and the price is going to continue to potentially go up.
So look at all sorts of infrastructure projects and ask when they start, what goes into all the planning. I remember I-35 being discussed in 2012. That was when we convened the first group to talk about how we would take it was a rider in the budget, take Rider 42 and use the money that was allocated to Austin to start looking at I-35. That was in 2012. My point being that on the front end you have planning. It takes some time to do those things. But in addition, when you're in that period of time, you have supply chain, a pandemic that none of us had ever seen in our lifetimes that had that sort of impact. You saw inflation that we haven't seen in decades. That's going to make a difference. So all you can do is what you can do to make sure that the voters, that what you're doing is you're addressing the problems the voters wanted solved and the goals they wanted achieved, and it will take longer. But it's doing just that.
You know, we unexpectedly, I would say unexpectedly for a lot of people, had the airport CEO resign. You know, did you see that coming in your first 100 days? Was this something that you thought you were going to, I mean, you had so many things that you had to deal with that you knew coming in. And you get little surprises thrown in at you.
Little surprise, yeah.
Okay. It's a big surprise thrown in at you.
There were a lot of big surprises, a lot of scar tissue that was inherited that I anticipated that when you start trying to fix something, other things would pop up. But with regard to the airport, no, that was not something when I walked in the door my first day as mayor, I expected that we'd be in that situation. The good news, I think, is that we have the ability to bring someone in as an interim who knows airports, and we'll have it'll be a national process, but we've got to get that airport right. In my view, we're several years behind on the expansion of that airport. And again, go back to what I was saying about urgency. I have a real sense of urgency about how we get that airport, get it done as rapidly as we can, again, facing things like increased costs because of inflation and supply chain.
Talk to us about the dynamic with the city council. Do you feel good about where you all are as a leadership team?
I really do. A couple of things about that. One is there is a real energy to this city council, which it's palpable. You can feel it, and that's a good thing, a very good thing. In addition to that, the council has demonstrated a desire, I was going to say willingness, but it's more than that. It's a desire to work together, to work as a team. And every individual seems to see value in how we approach things so that we get diverse points of view, diverse thoughts, but then operate as a team. Now, there are going to be times when people disagree, but so far, those instances where there's been disagreement or thought, somebody thinks differently than somebody else, that's being done in such a way that you get the idea, you get the diverse point of view, but it doesn't lead to the inability to work together on the next issue. So the energy and the teamwork has really been gratifying.
I appreciate that you said you guys have an energy to work together as a team, and sometimes it feels like you're working together, you're passing the policies that the people of Austin want to see, and down the street there's another fight happening to undo some of the very policies that you all have passed. You know about this all too well. Thoughts on the ledge right now and some of the bills that, would target Austin?
Sure. Well, I'm up there all the time. Talking to my former colleagues and some of the new folks that are up there about the role that I think is the appropriate role for the legislature to take in addressing issues. And I'm up there explaining how some things that they were upset about have actually changed, or they're in the process of changing. And I've said from the very beginning, and by the beginning I mean the first time I was mayor, that when you're the capital of the state of Texas, when you're the city that is the capital of the state of Texas, you ought to be looking for ways that you can partner with and work with the state of Texas. There's a lot to embrace about being the city that's the capital city of Texas. And so we're going to continue to work on those relationships. We're going to continue to try to find instances where we can work together. Candidly, the DPS supplementing and supporting of APD is an example of how the city and state can work together in a common sense way to do good by our constituents that we share.
I know we're only 100 days into this 730-day challenge for you.
Oh, I didn't count. I didn't know. Oh.
My math is mathing. Is it too soon to ask? I don't think so. Do you still believe?
Yes, it's too soon. It's too soon. Yeah. See, I even know what the question is.
I asked you this when you were running and you answered. Do you still think you'll seek a second?
Oh, my anticipation is that I will. Yes. Yeah, I tease about it, but yeah, just then I'm teasing. But yeah, I mean, it's. Let me put it to you this way. Being mayor of Austin is truly a unique and wonderful position to be in if you want to serve, if you want to, I said this during the campaign, if you want to get some dirt under your fingernails and actually be doing the service. And while it's been, this first 100 days have been, as I said, hurried, but I also said they've been happy.
Hurried but happy. How do you hope to describe the days going forward?
Eventful and successful. I think I'm really looking forward to the next 100 days and beyond. We've been working, for example, on a really significant workforce development. We've announced aspects of that workforce development. In fact, I came here from an event dealing with that will only be expanded in the next 100 days. Child care is something that I want to see us address with a real passion, make Austin the best city in America to raise a kid. I look forward to that, the eventfulness of something like that. In the next few weeks, we'll be announcing a program related to how we address some of our friends and neighbors that are living homeless that will make a real difference in the community. So eventful, and then with a high degree of success. But I don't want us to lose that urgency, because I think that is something that we desperately need right now. We're a big city now. Whether we like it or not, we're a big city. And we have some big city needs that we need to address pretty quickly.